to Salatcast, a financial special with Ant Thomas. Hi, Ant. How you doing?
Hey, Ollie. Yeah, I'm good. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Thanks for coming on the podcast again. So it's about a year since you were last on the podcast and where we're talking about finance again. So welcome back on the podcast. And yeah, you've reviewed the latest set of accounts.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So the club released their accounts quite recently. So it was a good opportunity for me to review it and try and turn the accountancy chat and the different language that's used by accountants and boring people like me into stuff that everyone can understand.
Cool. So what set of accounts are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's a good starting question because accounts review historical information. So companies have 9 months from their year ends to publish their accounts, which means that most of them are going to be at least 9 months out of date. So for Shrewsbury Town, they have a June year end, like most football clubs, and that matches in with when the season and players' contracts end. And so we're looking at the year ended 30th of June 2019, which represents the 18-19 season. So that was last season, being when John Askey started the season as manager and Sam Ricketts ended the season as manager.
Cool. So yeah, that's good context in terms of manager and season. And then yeah, there'll be a few interesting additions in terms of asset sales and things like that, which we'll come on to. So you've got everyone's attention, just for say 30 seconds. How would you summarize the accounts as a bit of a kind of a summary, an executive summary?
Yeah, so the key thing for this year is Shrewsbury made a big profit in the year, and that was largely driven by some transfer fees that we received in the year, which was a considerable amount. Other key things to notice is the cash position remains very strong. There's no borrowings in the club. We still own our own ground. Overall, I mean, Shrewsbury are probably the most financially secure club off their own backs in the whole of the Football League. It's a very boring set of accounts, but that's in the very nicest possible way because they are so clean. And we should all be very proud of that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and something I'm sure I'll come on to when I have my catch up with Kieran, is that Shrewsbury Town fans, and you'll know this because you've done a lot of fan media over the years. Do you think there's been a change in kind of perception and opinion of Shrewsbury Town in terms of finances?
Yeah, I do. I think it's taken a long time for that to happen, and for me, if you look over the period that Roland Wycherley has been chairman for, which started in 1996, I believe. That's when we were at the Gay Meadow. We were still in League One, but about to go out of League One into League Two. And it was at that period that the club really started to focus on becoming more financially solvent and being able to trade off its own back. And that meant, reducing expenses, becoming more efficient, managing its cash day to day far more effectively. And what we've seen over the last 20-25 years is that bit by bit the club has improved its cash position. It managed to turn from a position of having a overdraft and bank loans into none of those and just having cash in the bank. It's obviously moved to a new stadium and it owns its own stadium, and it's been able to build those cash reserves, invest in the club, the infrastructure of the club, increase the amount of budget it's got on the playing side of things pretty significantly, and I think the fans now appreciate why that's been done. At the start, it was very easy for supporters to go, why aren't we spending lots of money on the players, because that's how we're going to get promoted, to now people saying, well, we can see the strategy of the club to improve our financial position and how that can improve us in the long term and make us more competitive in the long term, and that makes us more sustainable rather than an attempt to go for boom, which so many clubs have done, and the vast majority of them have ended up going bust.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with that. And as a fan, yeah, I think we saw that when there was the announcement for the April pay and that the club weren't going to furlough any staff. There was a lot of fans being very, very positive. And very rarely now do you hear about fans saying, let's go and spend loads of money on a striker. We'd all love another Grant Holt, but I think we're all quite fair. But I guess at the same time, actually, in defence of the club, that statement suggests we're not spending money. We are still spending money, but it's prudent. Look at and interesting. We'll come to player sales at some point in terms of the highlights. You sign John Nolan for 50k, and then you sell him to Ipswich for quite a big profit. And I guess maybe that's a good place to start. So, if it wasn't for player sales, would the accounts look quite different?
Yeah, so if it wasn't for that 3+ million that we got in player sales and the profit we've made on that, then there would have been a loss recorded in the accounts. Now, the way I look at this is to say Shrewsbury would have known about those player sales quite early in the season, right? Because a big majority of them would have related to the sell-on fees we had for Connor Goldson, Ryan Woods, and then also the sales of Nsiala and John Nolan to Ipswich, which were right at the start of the season. And I want people at home to think about this. Like, if you're fortunate enough that you get a bonus in your salary at some point in the year, then say you get a bonus in August, which is equivalent to selling a player like John Nolan or Toto Nsiala, you're going to then spend that money or some of it in the subsequent months that come forward. So you're going to say, right, I've got this bonus, I might use it to do my garden up, or I might use it to get some new tyres on my cars, etc. And you're likely then to spend that money in future periods. And so when it comes to December, for example, and you're buying the kids Christmas presents, you might actually have more expenditure in December than you have income coming in. But that's because you've got that cash in the bank already from previous months. And that's what Shrewsbury have done here. They've said, yeah, we've got a massive amount in relevant to the club in terms of transfer fees early in that period. We're going to use that to invest in the playing squad for the rest of the season.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, the player sales, because it's a little bit of a speculation to accumulate, and I think it's also maybe just worth Ant explaining. So if Shrewsbury Town sell a player, let's just make up a player. We sell a player for $500,000. How quickly do we get that money?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ollie, and it's a commercial negotiation. So when Shrewsbury or any club sell a player to another team, there are a number of things that form part of the negotiation between the selling club and the buying club. You've got your transfer fee, which is the headline number. You've got a sell-on clause or any other parts of the contract. So when Shrewsbury sold Joe Hart, they had an initial amount that they received, pretty much on day one. They then said up to a certain number of appearances will receive £5,000 per appearance. They then had a clause that said, and if he goes to play for England, then we'll get another lump sum as well. You can add on a sell-on fee as well. And then the other part of that is saying, well, when do we actually receive the cash? So we might have said to Ipswich, yes, we'll agree to we'll accept a certain level of fee if we receive the cash now. Or we might have said, well, we need a higher fee if we're going to receive the cash in 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 months' time. And actually what you see from this set of accounts is that Shrewsbury at the year end, we have this thing in the accounts called debtors in the balance sheet, and debtors are amounts of money owed to a business, in this case the football club. And you'll see that at 30th of June 2019 that was over £2 million for Shrewsbury.
Okay.
So that means that's cash that they're going to receive in the subsequent period, essentially.
Okay. And that's good because, well, one, obviously the situation we're in now, but it also helps the club to balance your books. A lot of people play Football Manager and you get the money straight away, which means you can spend it straight away. But actually, from an accountant point of view, it's good to have that money coming in as a cash flow. And obviously the club can then actually give the manager quite not a realistic budget because they know the budget, but they can prudently forecast their expenditure and plan well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what they would have been doing at 30th of June going into the current season is to say, we've got a fairly good idea what our revenue is going to be from gate receipts and from the Football League, because we can probably forecast what attendances are going to be. We have a good idea how many season tickets we've sold. But then we also know that we've got amounts in the bank that we're prepared to use a certain amount of, and also these debtors that we're expecting to receive at some point in the season. So that allows them then to say, what can we spend on the playing budget, either through wages or transfer fees, without putting the club in jeopardy.
Yeah, so you just made me think of something as well, because football has some quite unique rules around it. And if a club was to go into administration, but they owed us money, we'd be not first, but up there with the players on the list in terms of getting paid. So that's quite important to note as well.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, going back to those commercial negotiations, the club would have, depending on who they were dealing with, that would then kind of feed into those negotiations. So if you were dealing with a Manchester City, who are backed by some extremely wealthy individuals and who could pay, to them, £1 million, for example, would be a small amount. They could pay it to us at a drop of a hat. Whereas, say we were negotiating 12 months ago with Bury over a Manchester player, we'd probably say to Bury, look, we know what financial position you're in. You need to pay us now before we sell you this player. So that goes into the negotiations as well.
Okay, so here's a random question. So you're the finance director of a Premier League football club. Would you prefer to get all the money in one go? So say you sell a player for 10 million, would you rather have 10 million in one go, or would you rather have 4 installments over 4 years of 2.5 million?
Well, cash is king, and cash now is worth more than cash in 4 years' time because of inflation, right? So if anyone ever asks you in the street, I could give you £10 now or £10 in a year's time, you will say, give it to me now. And as a finance director, I would always prefer the money in now. The only reason that would change is that if someone said, I can give you £4 million now for a player, or actually I'll give you 6 million, but we're going to spread it over 3 years. Now I would then say, well, is it a club I expect to be able to pay that? If so, I might say I'd rather the 6 million across 3 years, but those are the kind of things you'd consider. Yeah,
and they're the things that Brian Caldwell discusses with other clubs. And I think it's just interesting. They're the sexier parts of the accounts in terms of the transfer fees and how we get the money in.
Yeah.
So that's really good. So yeah, is there anything to add on that point, or until we maybe move on to the next question?
No, so the only thing I'd add is looking forward to the next year's account, so 30th of June 2020. I expect there is a reasonable chance that the club may make a loss in those accounts. The reason being that the revenue, is likely to remain reasonably stable. So your revenue from season ticket sales and match tickets and TV and broadcasting rights, etc.
You hope it does.
Yeah, you would hope it does. But I mean, we having experienced most of the season so far. Then
you're talking about this season now. Yeah, I always get tricked by the accounts. Yeah, the season that we're in now, 2 seasons in ahead, it could be a totally different story.
Yes, that's right. But for this season, I expect that that revenue, but because they've got that cash in the bank, plus the debtors that they're expecting to receive in this current season, the club may have said we can afford to spend a little bit more on wages and players' fees. So we may well see a loss for the accounts to the 30th of June 2020, but that is not necessarily means that the club's in trouble or that they're insolvent. It just means that the club are using those resources and the cash they've got to improve the playing budget.
And just to kind of build on that, we'll get the Liverpool money, or the lack of Liverpool money, in the next set of accounts.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, which could have been a lot more, obviously.
Yeah. So then building on that, then, so you were saying, it's one of my questions. So Shrewsbury have a reserve.
Yeah, that's right. So if you look at the cash levels in the accounts, I've got a graph in front of me here which shows that for the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, for the last 10 years, well, in fact, for longer than that, for the last 13 years, we've had at least £1 million in the bank at every year end. That's gone up more recently in the last 2 seasons to over £2.5 million in the bank. And that's a very prudent place to be. Again, applying it to household position, the guidance my dad always gave me is try and have 3 months worth of wages in the bank, just in case you lose your job, or you get hit by a car and you can't work. And the club are in a position where they've got an amount in the bank so that they can still pay salaries and keep the club running, even in a period of like we're experiencing at the moment with COVID-19.
Yeah, the cash one is interesting because the way that the income comes in, so your season tickets come in, and obviously you agree at certain deals, but obviously season tickets being quite an important part. To say that we've got money in the bank when the accounts are done doesn't necessarily mean we'll have the same amount in December, does it? Or February, for example.
Towards the end of the season, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason season tickets are so beneficial is that people pay up front and you've got the cash, right? And they are, even if they decide half the way through the season, oh, I'm not going next week, it doesn't matter. You've still been paid for it. Whereas your casual attendee on a match day is likely to be, or certainly some of them, impacted by the weather or how Shrewsbury are doing in the league, etc. But you're right, and I think one of the big issues, and I'm sure you'll come on to discuss this with Kieran, is with COVID-19 is the time of the season it came. It's towards the end of the season when clubs historically were probably starting to run out of cash anyway, because it's as far away as possible before season ticket income starts coming in. So really challenging time for a lot of clubs.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a challenge. Let's hold COVID-19 to the end. Let's come back to that, because I think that's an important place to look forward in terms of the financial situation for Shrewsbury. But looking at the current set of accounts, what would you say are the biggest differences between this set of accounts and the set of accounts before them? And maybe one thing I did notice that the turnover was less. Yeah,
so obviously we've talked about transfer fees, which by way and beyond are the biggest change year on year, given the value of those transfer fees. So revenue is down on the previous season. We can see a split of that in the accounts, but it doesn't give details on what the individual transactions are behind that. We can probably be quite sensible and look at last season versus the season before and try and pick out some key things there. So the season before, we had a great season under Paul Hurst. We had 2 Wembley finals. We also had an extra home game, which people had to pay ticket, the full ticket price for, even if they were season ticket holders. And actually, those games would have been televised. That you would have had some sundry income around extra merchandise sales, all that kind of stuff. And actually, between them, those 3 games, Charlton home and away, or 4 games, Charlton home and away, Rotherham in the final, and Lincoln in the Checkatrade final, would have brought in a reasonable amount between them. So I don't think it's hugely unexpected that the revenue did go down a little bit year on year.
So you think maybe in a couple of years' time, when we look back, this set of accounts of 2018 might be a bit of an outlier in terms of income?
Yeah, we're not talking millions of difference, but there is when Shrewsbury had a good season in the league and getting to the playoffs, clearly have a big impact, as do cup runs as well. Now, this season at the moment, the 1920 season, we've had another good cup run, as you mentioned, Liverpool and Bristol City, etc. So it may be the revenues year on year, when you compare an 18-19 with 19-20, aren't so significantly different.
Cool. Then the line below turnover is an interesting one. So the cost of sales. I'm looking at that. Does that mean that we actually spent more money on players, on wages in the ASCII season than the Hurst season?
Yeah. So the really interesting note to the accounts is the wages and salaries note, and this really explains how much is spent by the club on employee costs. And whilst this does involve non-playing staff as well, it's usually a good guide as to what we're spending on players. So it has gone up year on year. If you compare, the most recent amount, that was 4.1 million versus 3.8 in the previous season. So that is an increase. Just as an aside, looking back to the 2004-2005 season, when it was our first season back in the Football League after our hiatus into the conference, as it was at the time, the amount we spent that year was 1.4 million on players. Wow. On player salaries, right? So it's gone up from 1.4 million to 4.1 million, which is, that's incredible. So yeah. Anyone who has any slither of doubt in their mind that the move to the new stadium, the way the club's being run now, hasn't helped our playing budget, is bonkers, basically. Yeah. We've seen a massive increase over time in terms of what we spend on players. In terms of last year versus the Paul Hurst season, there are some things to consider, such as we changed our manager. last season. And quite often in football, when you change a manager, you have some termination payments to make for John Askey and his coaching team. And there was also a considerable turnover of players in that season because of players moving on, etc. And that would incur some cost as well. So it may be that we weren't paying, on average, players more, but we just had some additional costs that are one-off compared to the previous season.
Yeah, I think that's, you raised a lot of good points there, because as soon as you see total cost of sales going up, which for a football club is mostly wages, you think, okay, so John Askey had more money to spend, therefore he should have done better than Hurst. But yeah, you're right. You've got, I guess, the agent fees and things like that come under here as well, potentially.
They wouldn't go into wages and salaries. But
I mean, in terms of cost of sales?
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of things. So turbulence and long-term planning and sticking with a manager has financial implications.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, it's obvious, right? If you stick with a manager, and hopefully that's going to breed confidence in the manager and the players, there's going to be less turnover. Hopefully that's going to lead, that stability is going to help build some success on the pitch. And you're right, there's going to be, or you'd hope there'd be a lower number of turnover of players off the pitch as well.
Yeah, because it's interesting, isn't it? Because you could say, okay, let's sack the manager, but then your new manager comes in, potentially has less money to spend. So it's actually potentially going to do worse. Yeah, I was just nearly used the word irony. I wasn't sure if it really was irony, but I'll go with you. Yeah, it is, because you sign a new manager and you expect him to do better, but potentially you've actually hindered your playing budget.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, isn't it, to get that balance right?
Yeah. Is there anything else worth really kind of drawing on in the accounts? Is there anything that, from an asset point of view or investments that was worth highlighting?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about wages and employee costs. The other one, sometimes people don't make this association correctly, is that the other big cost, or for some clubs, is transfer fees. And actually, when you think about playing budget, you've got to balance those two things. As a manager, you're thinking, what can I spend on transfer fees and what can I spend on wages and salaries? And actually, to get a good feel as to what total playing budget is available to a manager, I think you've got to consider both of those elements. Now, in football accounts, what happens is when you pay money for a player, you recognise that as an asset on your balance sheet. So if Shrewsbury pay, let's say, £100,000 for a player, and that they sign them on a 2-year contract, the way you account for that is you say, we have an asset worth £100,000, and we're going to reduce the value of that asset over 2 years. So you've got £100,000 here. After 1 year, you reduce it to 50,000, and after 2 years, you reduce it to nil, essentially. But what you can see from the accounts is how much the club paid in the year for players' contracts or for transfer fees. And in the year to June 2020, that was around £500,000. So that is, for anyone who thinks Shrewsbury don't pay transfer fees, we're certainly not paying the level that Sunderland do for the likes of Will Grigg, but there's certainly an investment there as well as what we're paying on wages and salaries.
Does that give you any insight into kind of the value of the squad?
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, a player's only worth as much as someone's willing to pay for them. But the weird thing with accounting, and this applies to other industries as well as football, is you don't add a value on your balance sheet for players you've brought through yourselves. So Shrewsbury, imagine you've got 2 players, right? And someone like Barcelona are a great example of this, okay? If Barcelona bring Lionel Messi through their own academy, his value on the balance sheet is 0, okay? Which sounds obscene, doesn't it? Because we all know that Lionel Messi is worth an awful lot more than that, but you can't prove what he's worth. That's the thinking there. Whereas if they bought Cristiano Ronaldo for 100 million, his value on the balance sheet would be 100 million. And it's the same with any football club. You've got players who, John Nolan would be a good example. Shrewsbury bought in for a teeny amount of money, we're led to believe, and then sold him for over £1 million. So it's hard to see what the actual value of the squad is in totality.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's it just shows that we are spending money on players. And yeah, obviously we can think of those players that potentially we spent fees on. But yeah, obviously as you say, that's I guess another advantage of bringing your own players through. Any other comments on the sale? Sorry, on the accounts.
Yeah, I guess the other interesting transaction that happened in the year was the Power League pitches and buildings there. So that had previously been leased by Power League from the club, and then that was returned to the club in the year because Power League, it was well documented they were in some financial distress and needed to do that, and the club have brought those onto their balance sheet now. And what the accounts do show there is that they had an exercise from some professional valuers done, and it shows that there was considerable value to those buildings and pitches and the land there, which shows that it was probably a really good commercial deal for the club, that they've essentially got some assets worth over £500,000 for nothing.
Okay,
so
that's interesting.
Yeah, a good deal for the club or a bad deal for Power League, however you look at it. Or
so in terms of income and obviously the fans' impact on the club, how much of our income comes from the fans and directly in terms of turnstiles and ticket receipts?
So what you can see from the accounts is our turnover in totality, excluding player sales, was 5.4 million. And ticket sales represented just under 2 million of that. We've also got in there Football League income, which will be negotiated TV deals, etc., of 1.5 million, and what they call sundry income of 1 million, which there's no other details given, but one could guess that is things like money made from cup runs, other TV appearances, etc. So the ticket sales for Shrewsbury are significant, 2 million. But as you can see, that they're our biggest element of revenue, but they still make up less than half of total revenue, which really shows how TV money, etc., is still important for clubs at our level.
Yeah, because you think of the Premier League, and it's obvious at that level that income from TV is dwarfs that of, especially if you think of a club like Bournemouth, which are basically would have very similar accounts to Shrewsbury if we were in Premier League. Their income there for gates. So it's interesting, isn't it? When fans say the fans pay their wage, they only pay half of it.
Yeah, less than half. I mean, interesting, the Premier League. I've not looked at this season's numbers, but last season when West Brom finished bottom, the Premier League do list out how much clubs were paid for the TV deal, and they also get prize money for where they finished in the league, and they split it out by club. And the highest earners in that particular season were the two Manchester clubs, and they got about 150 million each, essentially, for being in the Premier League and doing what they do. West Brom finished rock bottom of the division. They got relegated. They received from the Premier League, for just essentially competing in the Premier League, nearly £95 million.
Yeah, which makes them one of the richest clubs in Europe in income that year.
It's crazy, right? And now let's compare that to, so they finished 20th in the Football League pyramid. Shrewsbury finished 27 places below them that season. But there was a difference in income of nearly £90 million and that's our total revenue for that season, 6 million, versus that 95 million that West Brom received. And that just goes to show, had we got promoted, I mean, we'd then be playing West Brom, who were already at huge advantage, and it just goes to show the haves and the have-nots in the football world in the UK. I mean, 27 places in the league difference, and almost 100 million difference in income. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? I mean,
it is crazy.
The mind boggles, and
if you think about
to show, how well, in my opinion, and this is an opinion, how well Shrewsbury do to compete in League One, and certainly if we can compete at the top end of League One, that is a really good achievement.
Yeah, we were talking about the Wigan Blackburn comparison last time we were doing the podcast, and now we've even got a better one because of this set of accounts. I think Sunderland spent £16 million on player wages that year, which a lot of it was dead money because they were paying off players and things like that. But yeah, it just goes to show that even League One has a ripple effect from the Premier League with bad finances, and the scale of the breadth of income between Sunderland or player wages Sunderland down to Accrington Stanley is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It'd be really interesting to see what the world looks like post COVID-19 in the football world, and whether this actually is some kind of reset to football clubs and the way they operate.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. And I think there's a good point as well, a point I like to kind of point out. Do any of our directors, including the chairman, take a wage or dividends out of the club?
No, they don't at all, and they never have. And I mean, I've always been a big Roland Wycherley fan, apart from when I managed to annoy him in the early days of the fan team. But you know, he's worked essentially wage-free full-time for the club for best part of 25 years, which is, you know, a real credit to show how much he loves the club.
Well, yeah, if he was even to take a modest wage, or say, I'm not going to say a number, but if we predict or guess what Brian Caldwell might be on, times that by 25 years, I think it's fair to say, not to mention the money he's put in, I think it's fair to say that the club owe him a huge debt, not just from the money he's put in, but also just the time and effort and the hours that he works for the club free of charge. It's quite phenomenal.
That's right. And, you know, he treats the club very much as he is a custodian of a community asset, and it's you know, when we were talking before, Ollie, before we started the broadcast about Bury and, you know, their fans and how they're trying to create the new AFC Bury, you know, football clubs, in my view, and I think in your view, are community assets, and they're there as a way of bringing the community together and represent the local community, rather than a rituals placing or something where someone can make money out of. And that's very much how Shrewsbury are being run. They're being run for the long-term safety of the football club, and in a way to try and benefit, you know, and utilise our assets the best we can.
Yeah, we don't really talk about this kind of stuff, not on a typical podcast, but yeah, for me, using UK company law for football clubs for me is quite foolish. They're not companies in their normal sense. One, you know, okay, you could go into the store and buy a Cadbury bar or a Mars bar, or, you know, you have choice. You don't really choose necessarily who you support as a football club, and also the impact on the community is huge. So yeah, hopefully some good can come of the Bury situation from an EFL governance point of view. And yeah, before we just to make sure we don't cut off too early, before we do talk about the future and particularly COVID-19, is there anything else highlighting from the accounts? I think it's worth saying they're a great set of accounts, but they are. Just to add,
the only thing that I'd add to this is something that's not really included in these accounts is the work of Shrewsbury Town in the community, who you know, are very closely associated to the football club, but they have their own separate annual report and board to ensure that they've got some independence from the football club. And I would say anyone who hasn't visited their website or is unaware of what they do, it's an incredible venture. It's the way that they you know, are involved in the community has grown massively over recent years, and they've brought a tremendous amount of help to those who are really in vulnerable positions. So check it out, donate if you can, get involved, and it's just another string to the bow of Shrewsbury Town in terms of the positive impact they have, and why we should be so proud of them as football fans.
Yeah, no, you definitely, and you see that just from the kind of the ambience around the football club, and the community is a big part of that, and what the players do. And we were also, he must come up. I'm confident, obviously I don't know this, but I'm confident it must come up when we recruit managers. There always seems to be a trend, don't we? We have managers that are willing, and players as well, who are willing to support the community side, because it does actually have a commercial impact. You know, Glenn often talks about it on the podcast that his kids, you know, see players and have interaction with players. That's a fan for the future. Yeah,
definitely. Certainly, you see that in the community. That the closer a feeling between the club and the community, the better it's going to be supported, I think. You hope that it has that impact with players as well as managers. And again, you know, the fact that Shrewsbury are not furloughing their players or deferring wages, etc. I just hope the football playing community as a whole sits up and looks at that and goes, wow, this is a club that look after their players, their staff, their community, and next time we go in for negotiations with a player, that benefits us, and it's not all about money.
Yeah, it's a really good. It's a nice segue to kind of look forward. So the Liverpool point will be an interesting part in the next set of accounts. That's something to look forward to in terms of maybe get a hint of the size of prize. But you mentioned earlier on in the podcast that in the future you think we might make a loss next year. And anything else any kind of other forecasts or that you might make about the next set of accounts?
No, just for people to be wary of why that might happen, and that again, that doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It's the same, and just to bring it back to the family finances again, if you've got savings and your income is £1,000 a month, but you've got £5,000 in the bank, and one month you spend £750 on a holiday. That doesn't mean that you're in financial distress. It just means that you've got some money in the bank that you've put away for a holiday, and now you're choosing to spend it. And that is the same with the football club. Is sometimes people see the headlines of a profit or loss, and they take that as the headline and a thing to focus on. Whereas for the football club and any other business, it's about, have they got the cash and the resources to continue trading? And Shrewsbury are certainly in the position where they have, and they can choose to spend a little bit more in future seasons as a result.
And oddly, a loss can actually help you in the long term as well, in terms of tax, in terms of profitability.
You do. There is a potential tax benefit to come from that.
Yeah. Cool. So Shrewsbury Town have got reserves. And we don't spend. Obviously, there's the rules in the in League One about in terms of how much you can spend. You can only spend 60% of your income on wages. But how would you say Shrewsbury are set to handle this COVID-19 crisis? Obviously, today is the 24th of April. We don't know when this crisis will end. But obviously it's hard to make a prediction now when we don't know when the first game back will be, what a momentous occasion that will be. Just as a general kind of overview, if fans are wondering how do you think the club is looking going into this crisis?
Well, I think it's going to negatively impact every football club. We know, because they're not getting some additional revenue in from those individual match goers. There's a lot of uncertainty as well. Like if Shrewsbury got over £1 million in revenue from the EFL last year, the EFL will also have a lot of uncertainty about their future cash flow as well, because how are they going to be able to negotiate TV rights or when they get paid from the TV companies if the product, being live football, is not shown? So for every football club, there's going to be a negative impact and a lot of uncertainty. Shrewsbury are in undoubtedly a much, much stronger position than other Football League clubs because they've got cash in the bank. And if we look at the position at 30th of June 2019, they had almost £3 million in the bank. They had another £2.5–3 million due from debtors, which likely would have paid a fair chunk of that before COVID hit. And then if you look at how much they spend on wages, which is £3.5–4 million a year, generally, you would say, well, they've probably got that in the bank. They've probably got a year's worth of wages and salaries available to be paid. And therefore, looking forward, they've probably got a good runway where even if no other income came in, they could continue to pay their staff. And that's before any support from the government, etc. I suspect there are other clubs that maybe had, rather than 12 months worth of runway, they had 12 weeks or 4
or
weeks.
less.
Because
there was two clubs that didn't pay wages in February, and that's Southend and Macclesfield.
So there's going to be an awful lot of clubs that are really biting their nails as to what this means. So do
you think Shrewsbury? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I think you were going to go there anyway. I think Shrewsbury could benefit from a pandemic is a bit crude, but in terms of attracting players, maybe we might be in a better place.
Yeah, I think it's all relative, isn't it? So they're going to be negatively impacted. There's a lot of uncertainty, but they are relatively far more in a far stronger position than lots of clubs. Are they going to benefit from it? I hope so. Being selfish as a Shrewsbury fan, I hope that players are looking at this going, my contract's going to end 30th of June. I've maybe been approached by Shrewsbury. They told me that if I sign, then I'm going to get my wages from 1st of July, and there's not a problem with that. And actually, I'm going to choose them over, a club that are promising me the earth, but actually, are they going to deliver on it?
Yeah, I don't. And in 2 years' time, you're not going to have that conversation with your wife about your mortgage and stuff, because while players at our level are earning good money, for haven't got they've from the age of 16 started a career. They haven't gone to college, not a plumber. They haven't got a trade as such. So football's their trade. They earn a good wage, but let's remember, they've still got bills to pay, mortgages to pay. They're not signing £4 million signing on fees. These guys are, so it's going to be interesting how that plays out.
Yeah, and I also think contract negotiations with existing players. So if you've got players who are out of contract at 30th of June, or maybe you've only got 1 year left, then the club are in a strong position if they can say, sign up to us now, we're going to pay you, let's get the deal done. And similar in the industry that I'm in, we generally have fairly high turnover of people as they go through their accountancy exams. But actually, we know that in periods of recession or global economic crisis, people tend to stick around with the businesses that they know are going to get their wages to them. They don't want to take the risk of moving, and it'll be really interesting to see if that's the same in football. And we may well see a really big depression or suppression in the transfer market whenever the football season does start again.
Yeah, I think transfer fees are probably going to be non-existent at our level going forward. I think it'll be interesting to see if there's extra players in higher leagues dropping down in terms of players. And I think it'd be interesting as well, because football players are so closely linked. Talking to each other. I get the impression that most players talk to other players of other clubs before they join clubs. And I imagine maybe the reputation of Shrewsbury is going to be quite strange. It's not strange. He's very solid. You saw on Ollie Norburn tweet out, when they did the furlough point, he tweeted out that he was proud of that, and other football players would have seen that.
Yeah, and I think as well, just thinking about clubs that will need to cut their cloth and pay less, you can, stop signing players for bigger wages and what have you. But the easiest way to reduce your wage bill is to have less players. And so what you might find as well is that clubs that have traditionally had 20, 25 players in a squad might say, well, actually, we're going to operate with a squad of 18 players or 19 or 20 players. So we might have an influx of free agents into the market as well, which is, you said, they won't attract a transfer fee, maybe willing to negotiate more on their salaries. So again, there may be an opportunity for Shrewsbury to pick up some players that they previously wouldn't have had the opportunity to get, or maybe when to sign that chose to use to join other clubs.
Yeah, it would certainly be interesting to ask these kind of questions to Kieran, particularly in relation to championship wages. And that'd be something that'd be interesting to discuss with him.
Well, I think that's probably the biggest bonkers of a league financially in the world, isn't it? The championship. So
it's mad.
Fascinating views on that.
Yeah, no, I do like as we played Bristol City ourselves, I do find the Bristol City story quite funny. They spent 120 million to stay in the same place. It's just balmy.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Cool. Yeah, thanks for joining us on the podcast. And anything else before we kind of close off? Anything else to add?
No, always a pleasure, Ollie. Like your t-shirt. And
this is actually a negotiation. This is a result of a negotiation. I got this free of charge. And for advertising something. So all about negotiation.
Yeah, exactly.
So big thanks for joining, and thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. Fingers crossed I'll see you at a football game soon, and hopefully we will get to play when it's all safe. Hopefully your family and friends and everyone are well. It's going to be an interesting time. There's Siri. Siri does this all the time. I didn't say anything to Siri, did I? But there we go.
They're always listening.
Yeah. So big thank you for joining the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ollie. Stay safe, mate. Speak to you soon.
Cheers.
Now can Gosling provide? No! Scott Howie excessive penalty.
So welcome to Salocast, Kieran. Thank you for joining us. So we've got Kieran Maguire, who's a lecturer at Liverpool University, and a football, I don't know, how do you say it, a football finance, I won't say that word, kind of expert on football finance. There we go, I said it. Thanks for joining us, Kieran.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So we're here to talk about specifically about Shrewsbury Town. So Shrewsbury Town's accounts, which we've just covered with Ant, but really maybe you can help us with a bit of context. You know, how special are Shrewsbury Town's accounts? Maybe a bit of context in League One, a step to the Championship, and then maybe just a bit at the end, maybe talk about COVID-19, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Brilliant. So just so you've seen Shrewsbury Town's accounts, I'm sure as soon as those accounts are put on Company's House, they winged their way into your inbox. So how do Shrewsbury's accounts compare with the rest of League One?
They are certainly top quartile. A lot depends on how do you measure a football club. Do you measure it through its income? Do you measure it through its profit on a day-to-day basis? Do you take into account its ability to spot and develop talent and sell it on at a profit? But I've quite a lot of contacts now with people sort of vaguely connected with the game. And certainly from what I hear in terms of League One and League Two, Shrewsbury is the model that others are trying to follow. If you've got progressive boards of directors who want to run a football club in a way which is sustainable. You know, the ultimate aim is that if you see yourself as a custodian of the club and as somebody that wants to, you know, develop, ideally take it forward without being a sugar daddy, then the Shrews are without doubt the template for other clubs to follow. Burton Albion are probably the other one in the lower really two divisions, which I have extreme affection for, in the sense of they don't try to live beyond their means, and it's exactly the same with Shrewsbury. You know, I've been there as an away fan with Brighton, with some great days out and some terrible days out, as it should be. But it's a proper football club in the sense it's the centre of the community. It is an institution within, and it gives people identity. And I think there's lots of positives about it. And what I like about it from a financial point of view is that it doesn't live beyond its means. Having said that, you know, last year it would have made a loss had it not been for player sales. And I think that's sort of indicative. You know, it would have lost around about £1.5 million, but it did have sort of sell-on fees from the likes of Connor Goldson. It sold some other players, and on the back of that, it managed to turn a pretty impressive £2.3 million profit.
Yeah, and that's an interesting part, isn't it? Because, you know, if you, like, I work for McVitie's, you know, we know we're going to sell X amount of biscuits in Tesco's and stuff within a range of percentage, obviously. Managing a football club finance is pretty difficult. Because we signed John Nolan for 50k apparently from Chesterfield, and then sold him on to Ipswich for £1 million, along with Toto Nsialo. And it's very hard to predict how your football finances are going to go. But it's interesting when the next set of accounts come through and the FA Cup money comes in. It's interesting how Shrewsbury Town managed to not only have a good set of accounts, and it's interesting actually over the last 10 years, I would say Shrewsbury Town fans particularly were, we want a striker, we want to sign players. We signed Grant Holt about 10 years ago or so for like 250k. We don't do that so much anymore. But it's really interesting. I'd say you don't see Shrewsbury Town fans complaining anymore about not signing and spending money. And actually, when accounts come out and the club makes decisions, the fans are quite proud of the way the club is run. Fingers crossed, one day we're going to have our day in the sun, and responsible clubs like Burton, Stanley, and ourselves will actually benefit, and maybe we can benefit next season. But we'll come back to COVID-19 maybe a bit later. How many clubs in League One are like Shrewsbury, and how many opposite way are running in the red? As a rough kind of estimate, how does the rest of the league look?
There's about 8 clubs that made a profit overall. AFC Wimbledon made the biggest profit, but that was again on the back of some player sales. There were some horrendous losses. Now I'm looking here at sort of the 2018 and 2019 accounts here. Sunderland haven't published their accounts. I suspect they will make for interesting reading, but overall the clubs in League One lost around about £50 million in 2018-19. Some clearly a lot more than others. And then there might be some surprises there. So, Bristol Rovers, they lost over £4 million. Charlton lost a lot of money, and things of this nature. Even though you might have thought, well, that club, I don't remember it doing anything spectacular.
No.
But if you're losing, 50, 60, 70, 80 grand a week, that's certainly a challenge for the owners. When we've got a normal economy, and as I say, we will discuss COVID-19, in the surreal environment in which we're at present, those clubs which have been reliant upon those clubs which have weak balance sheets, in my opinion, are looking very precarious. There are clubs in the Championship which I'm aware of, which I can't name at present, which are very, very close to administration, and the same is true in the lower league. So I think Shrewsbury probably had the second highest profits overall in League One last season, behind AFC Wimbledon.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just find it bizarre. I remember years and years ago, we were trying to sign a player in Darlington, nabbed us, and then 3 months later they went to administration. So it doesn't seem as a fan, it doesn't seem that agents and players take into account the finance stability of the club. I think that's something that might happen a bit more, or do you think does that happen at the moment?
I think that there is a fingers crossed mentality in the game, and somehow it's going to muddle through. I appreciate you spoke about having your season in the sun, going back up to the Championship, and I can remember as a fan going to the old ground in that division. Clubs lose money. It's the Championship, as I said, the League One lost about 50 million. The Championship, we're probably talking around about 600. And so if you do that step up, it is going to be really tough. You've only got to look at the three clubs who are bottom of the Championship at present. It's Luton, Charlton and Barnsley. They're the three clubs that were promoted from League One last season. It is developing into more of a yo-yo relationship between League One and the Championship than the Championship and the Premier League. Yeah,
do you expect, because when Shrewsbury were in that famous Paul Hurst season for us, and we were competing with Blackburn Rovers and I can't remember the other club now, Wigan, who lost substantial money that season. It's all about wages, as we heard from the infamous, cringeworthy Sunderland documentary, which I finished the second season last night. I remember the first season they were talking about a wage bill of about 15 million. And where Shrewsbury's is probably about 4, 3, something like that, that kind of region. Do you see the gap between League One and the Championship getting bigger? One, you've got the 8 million gap in terms of EFL, Premier League parachute money, whatever how you want to describe it, that comes down. But yeah, when we played Bristol City in the FA Cup, and to think that their chairman has ploughed like 100 million into their club, and they effectively haven't gone anywhere. They're in the same place. And I just worry that there's going to be a growing gap between League One and the Championship. And as you've mentioned already, we keep playing Rotherham every other year because they keep coming back.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. And what we have, and I would use Rotherham as an example of a club which is really well run financially in League One / the Championship. When Rotherham get promoted, they increase their player budget slightly, and they take that 7 million and they say, well, we will use that. We're going to try to stay up, but we will also take that into considerations that will give us a great chance of returning to the Championship in 12 months' time, should we not be successful. So increasingly, we're seeing clubs do what I would refer to as an air shot when they get promoted, in that they're not going to spend all of the additional money on players. They will spend a proportion of it, and they'll keep some back in reserve just in case things don't work out, and it gives them a head start in League One should they be relegated.
And it's all about wages, isn't it? People talk about transfer fees, but wages take up a biggest portion of clubs' income. And what's the kind of gap in wages between the Championship? So what's the average Championship wage and what's the average League One wage?
Well, the average player in the Championship is on £16,000 a week. The average player in League One is on 2,300.
It's such a
So
huge gap.
yeah, because what you've got in the in the Championship, you've got players being signed for 10, 15 million pounds. And what will happen is if an agent says, well, my client's just been sold for 15 million pounds, if he's signed a 4-year contract, surely he should be getting 4 or 5 million pounds himself. And you can't really say no to that. We all saw, as you mentioned, the Sunderland Till I Die documentary. I provided them with all of the data on Sunderland's finances, and they were just insane. But the Will Grigg transfer signing, which was pure David Brent, I'm sure we all agree. You were watching it, even though you've got no dog in that particular fight. You're probably watching that through your fingers. It's just
Yeah, I'd love to have seen the other side. So what was the other side looking like? They must have been laughing their heads off.
Oh, they couldn't believe it. And I know I teach football agents on occasion, and they were telling me the details of the deal, and they couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and rumour has it we nearly signed Will Grigg in January. And we wouldn't have paid we wouldn't have paid anywhere near $1 million. Probably not. I think it was going to be a loan deal. We probably would have paid a fee. But we decided not to do it in the end. But yeah, and it's hindsight. Watching that program was quite cringy because my wife's a football fan, and I then told her that he scored 4 goals. So what's the return per goal on that? It's not particularly good.
Well, that's right. He was a player who had a great song about him. He was not a great player.
No.
And also, I think he did come to the Stadium of Light with a huge weight of expectation, and that can weigh down because ultimately you're talking about a young man. I don't know what it's like. I teach. If I've got a class of over 300, I get blimey. There's a lot of people listening to me.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got 30, 40,000 people watching your every move, that can be very intimidating for a young man.
Yeah.
And I would never blame the players in all of this because sometimes
he wasn't fit.
Form.
There's a guy called Graham who I know from the Roker Report who asked that question: why did you sign Will Grigg? He doesn't fit into the team. And I think that just goes back to actually quite a nice link back to Shrewsbury, that there is a strategy in place. It's to sign managers like Paul Hurst, John Askey, Sam Ricketts, who have managed lower, to try and find players at a lower level, bring our own players through. And it's really interesting that there was a lot of pride there was an announcement last week that Shrewsbury will not be furloughing any of their staff, and they're paying wages for April. So is that quite uncommon at the moment, you think, in League One, or is that you think it's going to change as each month goes by?
The majority of clubs will be furloughing staff. What we are seeing is, and it will increase, as you rightly say, as over a period of time, as clubs' finances continue to be increasingly challenging, they won't have any alternatives. What I do think is interesting is that we have seen the story coming out this week. I mean, sort of until the start of this week, everybody was saying fixtures must be fulfilled. And there was sort of a united front. And then after the decision that was made in the National League to effectively write off this season, but they've still not worked out how they're going to do promotion and relegation, which I find intriguing. We are now seeing a few club owners starting to suggest that there are more important things in life than football for 2019-20. It is more important to have a club in existence this time next year, and therefore the discussion of writing off the season is becoming more to the fore. I think there's nothing wrong with furloughing in League One and League Two.
No, I don't think so either. I would be quite happy for Shrewsbury, not happy, but I would accept it from a fan of Shrewsbury, for Shrewsbury's level. Not so much Liverpool or Tottenham, who make millions of pounds worth of profit. But from a League One club, I think it's quite acceptable with a turnover of less than 10 million.
Absolutely, and I do think that sort of community clubs, and I think Shrewsbury Yeah, I know Andy Holt at Accrington. I know Mark Palios at Tranmere. They do amazing jobs, and I think therefore they see the long-term picture, and the long-term picture is that you will probably benefit from furloughing if it ensures the existence of the club. What we have seen over the course of the last 24 or 48 hours, which is a further step, and what we will see is that things which we didn't think were going to be feasible a week or two ago will now come into the public domain. It looks as if Oldham are going to furlough their staff, whereas if you take a look at the majority of League One and League Two clubs, everyone to date has said we will furlough the players, but we will top up their wages. So effectively, the government pays the first 80% of that £2,500, and then the club will top up the remainder. It appears that Oldham have said we will simply just take that furloughed money, and that's all you're going to get. And if you don't like it, you're going to be made redundant. Now, if you've got no players of value in the transfer market, actually, you can understand the logic behind them. But also, if you know anything about Oldham, it's quite a toxic environment club. Clearly, the relationship between the owner and the fan base isn't a good one. The way that managers have been accelerated in and then out of the club is always a cause for concern. The lack of continuity there. So it's not perhaps surprising, but it is indicative of clubs don't have any money. Listening to Gary Neville yesterday, and I'm not a Manchester United fan, but Gary does talk a lot of sense at times. He was saying that as a League Two club owner, you've got the issue of if matches return, there's health and safety. You've got a responsibility towards the players. If it's not fit and proper for fans to attend matches, if it's not health, if it's not a safety issue, or rather, if it is a safety issue and a health issue, then surely the same has got to apply to the players. So therefore, you can't play matches unless you have paying customers there as well. So it's an intriguing position that we find ourselves in. But furloughing will become more and more common, and you will start to see clubs in the Championship using it. We've got, is it just Norwich and Newcastle in the Premier League? And if there's one club you'd expect to use furloughing in the Premier League, in fact, if there were two clubs, it would be Newcastle and Spurs. And Spurs only reversed it. You've only got to look at their press release. They only reversed it because the bad publicity outweighed the value of the savings.
Yeah, which I think is... Yeah, it's interesting that one of the comments you made there, one is about the long term. Obviously, Spurs, I imagine Liverpool did it because of the long term impact on sponsorship and fan, almost like hostility to further things. Obviously, saw Liverpool fans get upset when they tried to do a £70 or so ticket. But it's really interesting that you thought about, I didn't think about this before, that, obviously, talking of finance and P&Ls, Shrewsbury Town have invested in a squad. And obviously, we've got this really weird, complex situation coming up where a lot of contracts end on the 30th of June, I believe. But then, Shrewsbury have got Ollie Norburn, we've got like Roshawn Williams, we've got quite a few players who've got time on their contract, but also assets. So it's going to be very interesting that every club is probably going to make decisions. There's not going to be any sweeping statements, or you cannot be able to generalize, I don't think. I think every single club is going to manage its situation in quite unique and different circumstances, different outcomes.
Yes, and you're also employing human beings. You're also employing, sons and brothers and boyfriends and husbands and so on. And I think that's what we sometimes forget, because as fans, we see them as our possessions, and we want them to generate money for us. And I think that there is that danger of losing. Ultimately, there are human beings we're dealing with, but there will be a financial issue. If presently under FIFA regulations, if a club fails to pay a player his wages, his full wages for 2 months consecutively, then the club is in breach of contract, and in theory, the player can walk away. Now, if you have discovered some young talent, if you've made some excellent signings, and those players are worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, perhaps seven figures, then you've got to be very careful in how you manage that, because whilst it might be good for your short-term cash flow, to let the players effectively become redundant, let them walk away, you're also losing the right to a fee. Now, it could be in the case of Oldham, they've assessed the squad and said, well, all of our signings are academy and free transfer players, and that's what we do see in League One and League Two. It's actually, people will be amazed at the number of clubs who do not spend any money at all in terms of transfer fees. They're relying on loans, they're relying on academy development, and they're relying on Bosman signings as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's going to be interesting. Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge us as a podcast as well, as of making any kind of statements. You need to hold everything quite lightly, and everything you do record, including this podcast now, is going to be a stamp in time. And I already saw this morning, just before we were coming on, that the League One and League Two teams are looking for doing salary caps, and that was on the BBC website just before we started. So this is quite a tough question for you, Kieran. But do you think, or I guess firstly, do you think there'll be an impact of COVID on the EFL long term? And I say long term, over the next 5 years, because football is just changed so quickly. And do you think the EFL think any clubs will maybe potentially go to the wall, a bit like we saw at Bury?
Yeah, well, I'll sort of, first of all, in terms of salary cap, there is a salary cap in League One and League 60%,
60%, yeah.
That's right.
60% of revenue. But I mean, more, I think they were talking about the fixed amount that you can't go over, more of like an NFL salary cap.
Yeah. I mean, an NFL style salary cap, in my mind, would only work if you've got NFL style revenue distribution between the clubs.
You can't compare Accrington Stanley to Sunderland, for example.
No, and also Sunderland are in receipt of parachute payments. So yeah, they start off. Yeah, they start off this season with £14 million of parachute payments coming in, and they also have legacy contracts from being in the Premier League and also trying to get out of the Championship in the first season. So salary caps, if it's a hard cap in terms of a value, I think that's going to cause massive issues.
And you don't think I don't think that would get signed off by the EFL or the owners either. But it's interesting that these kind of things, you never would have thought of these, this kind of discussion wouldn't have happened. Was it 8 weeks ago? You wouldn't have thought that these kind of discussions would be happening. And I guess, the word unprecedented has been used quite a lot. Maybe we'll have some unprecedented moves or rule changes because of this.
Yep. So certainly salary caps, I don't think a hard cap will work for the reasons we've discussed. And also, if you take a look at Stoke City, Tony Scholes, their chief executive, has said, we've got owners who just want to spend as much money as they want. What's wrong with that? And you go, well, I'm not actually sure. From a competitive balance point of view, I can understand it, but there isn't competitive balance in any of the leagues because we are in a situation. If you look at the Premier League, you've got Manchester United and Bournemouth. And if you compare their income streams, they're ridiculously different. In the Championship, you've got last year Aston Villa lost £84 million in getting promoted, and still satisfied FFP. But they had billionaire owners, and at the bottom end, we've had the likes of Rotherham and Burton who have set a £4 or £5 million wage budget and stuck to it. So I think that's going to be a struggle. Are clubs going to go to the wall? Potentially, yes. And the reason for that is if the UK economy is going to contract by 35%, and that now appears to be a figure which is being discussed in economic circles, all industries are going to be hit, or rather nearly all industries. The food industry is not going to be hit because, let's face it, we're all going to come out of this, the size of Michelin men. And what happened to you during COVID? I started COVID as an L and I came out as a double XL is going to be, that's my story of it. So anything in the entertainment industry, and I don't, we think of football being a bit more highbrow than that, but actually football is. It's in the entertainment industry. Well, if you talk to theatre owners, if you talk to publicans, if you talk to restaurant owners, and so on, they're all going bust left, right, and centre. So why should football be excluded from that? Especially given the fact it is run financially on a wing and a prayer during the good times. It's we go back. We've forgotten what football was like. But at the end of February, before COVID kicked in, before the lockdown kicked in, Macclesfield Town and Southend United both failed to pay their wages. Now, if they can't pay their wages when they got the turnstiles clicking, and they're not alone in being in a really precarious financial situation, when we move to a COVID environment, there's going to be far more clubs. Those clubs which have been run well, and where the fans have been saying, oh, you've got to speculate to accumulate. And I think you said that, historically, perhaps some Shrewsbury fans have been critical of the management style and the business strategy of the club. Actually, so from what I see on social media, Shrewsbury fans are now really proud. Is it Brian Cantwell?
Brian Caldwell is the MD, the CEO, and we had Matt Williams, who's now at Burnley as well before him. And he did a really good job as well. But it all comes down to the chairman who had this vision to have a sustainable football club. He sold the Gay Meadow at the height of the property boom for 13 million, and we built the new stadium with no debt, which is quite a remarkable feat. And there's everyone, it's phenomenal because quite a while ago people were a bit critical because he didn't communicate and all these kind of things. We weren't spending money on players, but if I do a tweet from the Salopcast account, he needs a statue, you'll only get positive tweets now. It's really interesting how it's turned, and the guy's done an absolutely phenomenal job. And they can't say he doesn't take any money out of the club. He does it for his love of the club, and he's a true custodian, like Andy Holt and the Burton Overs and Mr. Robinson as well.
Yep. I think you've got a right to be proud of the club.
Yeah.
It's how do you turn
that
mentality in the fan base around? Because when I talk I've had quite a lot of work to do with Newcastle, and the mentality of the fans there is, we want a sugar daddy. And they're getting very giddy at present. And I know that the local newspaper at Newcastle, it ran a poll. Are you concerned about being taken over by Saudi Arabia because of the human rights records, because of the attitude towards women, the attitude to homophobia and things? Only 6% of fans were concerned. The rest were going, bring it on. All they can see is the dollar signs. And I think what's impressed me at Shrewsbury, and I can see why the fans have bought into it, and it's exactly the same. Whenever I talk to people from Accrington, again, their relationship with Andy is they're all those ducks are in the same row. It's, we love our club. We know where we are in the pecking order of football, and if we have a bit of football fortune, good cup run, good promotion run, that's fantastic. But ultimately, it's the fact that on a Saturday afternoon, we know we're going to be here in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years time, and that means more to us. And I think that's really good. Communication between clubs and fans and engagement is something which is so lacking in many clubs. But when you do speak to people, and that's what I've found, because initially when I started doing the nonsense that I do and putting out all the data, the reaction of everybody is, you've got an agenda against my club, because the numbers was universally atrocious. But if you do engage with people and you just say, well, okay, let's just take a look, let's have a discussion, you do quickly win people around. And I think,
and that's what Brian Caldwell has done, because he does videos whenever we have Liverpool games. He does talk quite frank, quite honestly. We've had him on the podcast as well, and he talks very frank, and I think that's really helped the trust. It takes years to build that trust. And we're definitely there. So my one final question. So we've talked about how clubs are struggling with cash flow. I read an article on The Athletic that says that in elite football, transfer fees might half. Do you expect wages in League One to drop over the next few years for players?
Yes, I do. And the reason for that is ultimately we've got two issues as far as running a club. You've got income and costs. And the costs, which are the wages, are ultimately driven by the amount of income coming into the club. So we've got three sources of income. We've got match day, broadcast, and commercial. Now, match day income is not going to go up, because there's going to be people unemployed who can't afford to renew their season tickets. Clubs know that they cannot afford to increase prices as well, because we're living in this post-COVID environment. They're trying to attract people to come to the grounds. You can't do that if you increase prices. So matchday income is if it plateaus, you've done well. If we look at the broadcast deals, the broadcasters have been pretty good to date. They've not asked for their money back, and that's partly due to the fact that we've got a symbiotic relationship in football. Sky need football, football needs Sky, and with BT Sport as well. Therefore, it's not in Sky's interest to ask for money back. At the same time, loads of people are either cancelling their Sky subscriptions or effectively they're furloughing, and that's what Sky have done. And you can understand why. They don't want to lose the relationship, so Sky haven't got money in. They're not in a position to offer more money, so that's not going to work. Third form of income is commercial. It's sponsorship income. Well, we've just said the UK economy is going to tank by 35%. Do you want to be seen, even as a national, an international, or even a local sponsor? Do you want to be seen to be signing a 6 or 7 figure sponsorship deal with a football club when you've just made 20% of your staff redundant? From a public relations point of view, A, you're not going to have the money, and B, the reason why you sponsor, because it makes you look good, well, it's going to make you look bad. So the money in football is going to go down. If the income goes down, then what you tend to find is the costs will follow. As far as League One and League Two is concerned, you'll know this better than I, Ollie, but practically every player is on a 1 or a 2 year contract.
Yeah.
So there will be thousands, will be probably at least 1,000 players this summer on the 30th of June coming out.
Probably more, maybe 3,000-4,000, something like that. It's going to be in League 1, 2, and the National League. There's going to be literally thousands of players being released.
Well, National League contracts, they finish on the 30th of April. And that's why they've actually cancelled the league, because they couldn't afford to pay the players
6 days, and they've not paid any outcome.
All of a sudden, you've got thousands of football players without contracts. That means that the relationship, whenever you negotiate a price for anything, you look at the relative power of the two people. You've got the employer and the employee. In the past few years, the power has switched towards the player. And therefore, they've been able to negotiate, or their representatives being able to negotiate higher wages. What we will see post-COVID is that the power shifts back towards the clubs, because there will be so many players chasing so many fewer jobs. Squad sizes will be reduced. And with the clubs having less money coming in, wages will fall slightly, I think. Not hugely in League 1, 2, but they will go down. Transfer fees will collapse, because transfer fees are much more discretionary.
And there'll be a lot of demand and supply for players is going to be obviously favourable for clubs like Shrewsbury.
And even if you go on to the Premier League, I think the elite players will still be in demand, because they're living, they're not living in our world. We know that. But even if you drop into the mid-tier clubs in the Premier League, the likes of West Ham, Leicester, Palace, Brighton, Bournemouth, those type of clubs, sort of the other 14, they might have been chasing 2 or 3 players in Europe. Now, what they might be able to still chase those 2 or 3 players, but one of the clubs that is selling is in financial distress, and therefore they might have been looking for 20 million, and now they'll take 12. So
there's going to be
fees will come down.
There's going to be a lot of even if every Championship club just trims their squad by 3, that's a lot of players, and there's going to be a lot of interesting conversations between Brian Caldwell at Shrewsbury Town offering a former Championship player a contract, and that player's got to make a decision: do I go and play for Shrewsbury and just about pay my mortgage, but can't go on my holiday to 3 holidays to Magaluf and buy 2 new cars, or versus players from other divisions? It's going to be interesting how it progresses, and obviously we don't want any clubs to go. We don't want clubs to go, and we don't want people to be have issues of mortgages and payments and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully, in some way, Shrewsbury prudence can have a positive period over the next few years, and hopefully we can have some kind of benefit for financial good management.
Yeah, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer said last week, he spoke about Manchester United exploiting the market. I think he chose his words clumsily. but then, his English is a lot better than my Norwegian, so I'm not going to criticise him for that. If you are a club which has a strong balance sheet, as Shrewsbury do, is it Shrewsbury or Shrewsbury?
Shrewsbury. Yeah, it's both. Okay. Well, the BBC say Shrewsbury. Some people say Shrewsbury, but then the masses, the people, say Shrewsbury.
Okay, Shrewsbury. Right. Sorry about that. Right. If Shrewsbury have got a strong balance sheet, which they do, then they are in a slightly better position than those other clubs in League One who have been sailing too close to the wind over the past 3 or 4 years, who perhaps have been relying on their owner. So there's one club in which is presently in League Two. I won't mention it because their owner sued me a few months ago, who was spending £157 in wages for every £100 coming through the door. Now it just so happens that he runs a nightclub. He's not got any money from his nightclub to subsidise the club at present. So and that, I don't wish ill will upon any football club, because that community relationship is, to me, is the core thing. It's the fact that it gives people that local identity. I think for especially elderly people who are living alone, that once or fortnight trip to the ground, drinking with the same people, standing with the same people. I think the good that football does, that intangible good, is hugely underappreciated in society as a whole. And that's why I'm desperate for every club to survive.
Yeah, we could easily carry on for a lot longer, and I've got some interesting ideas in terms of, for me, I don't think that football clubs should be treated as like a normal company, because they're not a normal company. We saw it with Bury. How many hearts are broken, and as you say, some elderly fans, and just I'm missing it myself. I'm thinking I haven't seen one of my best friends, so I sit next to my friends, or sit next to around me. You see a lot of people on a weekly basis when you're a football fan, and it's going to be a very interesting time. But in terms of following you, Kieran, how can people follow you? And you do an excellent podcast as well, so that's worth listening to.
I run I co-host the Price of Football podcast with comedian Kevin Day. He's the guy that writes all the notes for the people that host Have I Got News for You and the MASH report and things of that nature. So I'm very lucky to be working with a professional. So we look at the finances of football. All the lunatic stuff. The clubs which are being sponsored by taxi companies that own no taxis. The clubs that are paying players' mothers hundreds of thousands of pounds to be academy scouts, because that doesn't count for FFP. Just a pure coincidence, of course. Not saying there's anything wrong with it. And so we do that twice a week, and we're always looking for answers for questions from readers. Price of Football on Twitter, effectively at Kieran Maguire. I've written a book, which I'm advertising behind me. If people are interested in all the nonsense in football, amortization, financial fair play, all that type of stuff, it's effectively football finance for non-football people. And I'm going to do a quick plug here. All the royalties for that go to the Trussell Trust, which is the country's leading food bank charity, and it is in huge demand at present as a result of pandemic.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I retweeted that as well, and I'll retweet your details out. So and I guess I would just say to football fans and of any football club and Shrewsbury Town fans, you do have questions, do share them to Kieran, because you do cover them on the pod, or you're very active on Twitter. So thanks for that. Thanks for shining a light on this. I think it's very interesting, and thanks for your time today. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast.
Thanks very much for the invite, and good luck to everybody. Stay safe, stay indoors, and look after yourselves.
Cheers, guys.